Hi, everyone. I want to welcome you all this evening. And Colleen Storey, I see that you were on as a guest here. So give us a second. Julie?
Working on it.
Bear with us for just a second. Perfect. We're so glad to see you.
So,
would you like to introduce yourself, my dear?
I will. My name is Colleen Storey. I am a social worker with PeaceHealth Hospice. My job title is Holistic Care Supervisor, and I oversee the bereavement department, the MSWs that work out in the field, as well as the volunteer coordinators. I also fulfill a role as a bereavement counselor, and I facilitate a number of groups and perform one-on-one counseling as well. I have a part-time practice, and I am a grief recovery specialist as well, been trained in that program. So what kind of brings me here today is my 6-year journey, that long distance caregiving to my mother who had Alzheimer's disease. She died 3 years ago today. So today's the anniversary of her death. So I think it's appropriate, that I'm here, right?
It is appropriate, but it can't be that easy. I'm sorry.
Well, it's all good. So I'm going to share my screen, with the PowerPoint. Do I have control to do that? I think I do.
Yes, you do. So what I'm going to do is to remind everybody that they can put their questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll answer them at the conclusion of your presentation. And then I will disappear and it's all yours.
Okay, well, let me see if I can. Oh, yeah, I can. Okay, perfect. Sorry, I'm not used to Zoom anymore after doing the other. So let's.
Not a bad thing.
Yeah. Not up there. I want to make sure. This slide. All right, so we can see the screen now, yes? Did I lose my volume?
No, you're all good to go.
Oh, all good to go. Great. Okay. So we did my bio. So I like these 2 quotes from Dr. Doka, and I'd like to read those. That grief is a constant yet hidden companion of Alzheimer's disease and other related dementia. And follow that up with grief is a companion to Alzheimer's disease at all phases of the disease and following the death. And that is just so true. Let's see. So the objectives that I set for today is 1, to define and normalize grief, to provide caregiver support through the understanding and education of anticipatory grief, as well as to enhance the caregiver tools for dealing with their own grief. So defining grief. So grief is the emotional response to any significant loss that a person can experience. So I just want to take a second and think about those words. It's the emotional response. So grief is all about our emotions. And our society does a really great job at trying to intellectualize our grief, which tends to shut us down, and we don't feel free to feel. So grief really is about the emotional response. And for caregivers and those living with dementia, losses occur in the early, middle, and late stages of the progression of the disease, not just at the time of death. So in other words, we are experiencing a series of losses throughout this journey. And as I go along, I'll be sharing some of my mother's story and my own personal losses and grief throughout her process. So grief is a normal human experience that needs to be supported. We need to experience it and talk about it and be supported. And grief is experienced in all facets of our being. So emotionally, so on the emotional level, we're going to experience some sadness and helplessness and loneliness. Perhaps some shock, that numbness and disbelief that this is even happening. Anger, perhaps, at different things along the way. Panic, anxiety, the feelings of just being overwhelmed. And there's also that sense of denial that this is going on, the sense of guilt, thinking that I need to be doing more. What should I be doing? The woulda, coulda, shouldas that come in, fear, the despair, confusion, envy, the feelings of unfairness, that this is just unfair, what my loved one's going through and what I'm going through. Is this whole thing is just unfair. And, a loss of self-esteem. And when we get to the end of the journey, a sense of relief that the person's, the deceased person's sufferings has ended, and our caregiving has come to an end. And so that sense of relief that one may feel is all pretty normal responses. That grief is kind of like that roller coaster journey. We're going up, we go down, we come up, we go down, and through the whole thing. And I think with the Alzheimer's and dementia journey in Lewy body Parkinson's is so difficult, because that road, for me personally, it was 6 years of going up and coming back down and experiencing all these emotional. But not only do we feel it emotionally, we feel it physically in our bodies. Processing the grief along the way, we can have a sense of like increased or decrease of appetite, where we're hungry or we're not hungry. We're going for the comfort food, right? Because it helps us to feel better. Weight gain and loss, well, of course, that's going to go with the increase or decrease of appetite. But nausea, indigestion, diarrhea, uncontrollable bouts of crying at times. Sometimes we'll have a weakened immune system, so we have headaches, our joints hurt and ache, just like overall flu-like symptoms, constant fatigue, exhaustion, low energy, just to name a few of the physical responses. We get individuals that are sent to us from a doctor after they've gone in and go, hey, this is what's going on with me. They run a gauntlet of tests, and then the doctor finds out that either they're going through the caregiving phase or they're going through their loved one has died. And this is their grief coming up to the surface. And so they'll send them over my way, and where we can help at the bereavement center, help them process this grief. We also experience grief through our mental responses, the lack of concentration, short-term memory loss, being disorganized or indecisive. You just can't make a decision to save your soul. Sometimes just a pure inability to communicate is hard. We know what that word is. We see it in our brain. We just can't pull it out. Lack of concern for self. Just too tired to really take care of ourselves. Grief also comes out through this journey through socially. Grief tends to bring about huge changes in our relationships with individuals, with family members and friends. Oftentimes when we're caregiving, we're kind of isolate ourselves because we have a role to play. We don't have the time for all of this. And then people that don't validate how we feel, and I'm going to touch base more on this later, but they don't know, it's like, well, they're still living, so they're not validating our feelings. They don't know how. And if they've never gone through the journey themselves, it's really difficult to provide the support because we have a tendency to want to just fix things. And we all know that throughout this journey, it's not fixable. We can't turn back the clock. And then finally, there's spiritually responses that we can experience with our grief. And again, that can be anger with God. Some people can lean in. When I'm talking spirituality in a broad sense, I'm talking about either one's relationship with God or their quest for meaning or the purpose for their life. And so it can bring about a tremendous amount of questioning, trying to figure out what's going on. Some individuals can lean really heavy into their faith, and it supports them and it brings them all the way through. Others, not so much. They just don't feel that they're getting the support that they need. That the response is that they're in God's hands and it'll get better. All of that isn't quite helpful. Again, that's intellectualizing the grief that we're experiencing. So I guess I should have the chat on to see if there's any questions. Okay, no, all right. So grief takes a tremendous amount of energy, tremendous amount. This is really important for the caregiver to understand. So we have our loss right here. And this could be the death. This could just be another loss due to the diagnosis that we suspected was coming. So when we experience a loss, the very first things that human beings do is we go into the past and we start focusing on the woulda, coulda, shouldas, what if. I could do this. I should have done that. I shouldn't have yelled. I could have done this. What if I'd done this instead? What if I gotten them to the doctor and got an earlier diagnosis? And would that have been helpful? All the woulda, couldas. And here's our brain here, and there's a lot of energy that's going out into past experiences. And I'd like to say that I'm a professional grief counselor, but I'm telling you, when my mother was in the early stages, she hadn't been diagnosed yet, and we were really suspecting that this is what was going on. Growing up with my mother was very, very difficult, and she was highly critical. And so it was really hard to tell, is this mom being mom, or is this something more than that? And once it became clear that it was definitely something more than that happening, my mom was very good at pushing my buttons, and I would snap at her. I would say things to her. And I can't even believe I'm going to admit this, but sometimes I would just yell back at her, and knowing in 10 minutes she's going to forget I said anything. Not very professional. But when we're in the crux of the caregiving, and we have a past history with individuals, and sometimes our triggers just get activated. We're tired, we're frustrated. And so, we spend a lot of time in the woulda, coulda, should, what if category. But then we're also looking at the future. Now what's going to happen? I know that this is going to end in death eventually, but what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day or the next day? I need to start getting caregiving in the house, but they won't allow me to bring caregiving into the house. And so we're problem solving way into the future. And again, that's a lot of brain energy coming up. So in essence, it doesn't leave us a big reservoir of energy to deal with the today, with the here and the now. So I just think it's really important that we understand this. And I don't know if I can move this out of the way, but grief isn't an event. It's a process, right? So for individuals and caregivers living with dementia, the grief process is ongoing. And there are key milestones along the way and pinch points where the grief may have that upsurge, like with diagnosis. There's going to be a whole lot of grief around hearing that, yes, your loved one has Alzheimer's, dementia, Lewy body, Parkinson's. It brings up a lot of emotion. But then along the way, we're looking at increasing loss of memory and their cognitive functioning. Perhaps eventually they're going to lose their driver's license, and then they can't go out alone. They can no longer be left alone. Help with personal care. All of these little milestones are huge in the overall picture. And there's a lot of a grief attached to it. And then we're looking at placement. And when I found a placement for my mom that was, it was a wonderful place. And heck, half the people that worked there, either I went through high school with or was related to them. So they all knew my mother. And just days before we were to move her in, she fell and broke a couple of ribs. And she was by herself. She called an ambulance, and they came and they brought her to the hospital, and she was kind of in and out. And she heard them talking. They couldn't get her blood pressure up. So they heard her talking a lot about maybe having to take her to Olympia and admit her into the hospital there. And I was raised in a little rural town on the coast. And so she was kind of in and out listening to them. And a long story short, when she actually woke up in the hospital bed in Willapa Bay, she thought she was in Olympia. And so the doctor who was in charge told me that my mom could not go to the facility that I wanted to place her in, which was directly across the street from the hospital, where she would have gotten excellent care. And he goes, she's exit seeking. And I said, exit seeking? Yeah. She was out talking with all of the nurses at the nurses station because she knew them all. She was just visiting. And he goes, well, she thinks she's in Olympia. And I said, that's because you guys were talking about taking her to Olympia. So yes, she is confused that way. Long story short, they wouldn't allow me to place her into the placement that I had for her. And they found another placement that was nothing where I would want my mom to be in. So that was a huge upsurge in my grief and my responsibility and the woulda, coulda, shouldas. It was very, very difficult. And then once she was in the placement, in the facility, I started seeing the aggressive behaviors, embarrassing behaviors. And that's even before the placement. I would take her out to lunch and she would the waitress would come and ask her if she wanted more coffee, and she would say no. And no, thank you. And then she would ask the person across from us. And my mom would just say horrible things about the waitress and how she never asked her for coffee. And I'm like, oh, yeah. And so all of this is this isn't my mother. And I find myself apologizing to those around me because this really wasn't my mom. My mom would never behave that way. And then when she started losing her communication, she could talk, but it was very little. We couldn't have the conversations anymore. I couldn't go and sit and talk about the past. She was always great at talking about the past, and she would come alive because she would remember all of that. And that's when I could see my mom in her. And this lady I'm sitting, that was my mom. I could see her. And then she lost the ability to remember and to talk about her past, her childhood. And I started losing her a little bit more. And for 6 years, I drove from Vancouver to Aberdeen, Washington every single weekend. And then her death occurred, and they called to let me know that she had passed. I was on my way up to see her, and I didn't quite make that. So there are a variety, there's 7 different components to caregiver grief. There's ambiguous grief, chronic sorrow, anticipatory grief, disenfranchised grief. And then these are the ones that aren't very validating here for us folks, is heartfelt sadness for the person with dementia, grief for our own personal losses and for their losses as well, and the worry and felt isolation. And I'm going to go over these one by one. So ambiguous grief. This is the loss is so different for people with caregiving, with dementia, because we're grieving the psychological changes of the person. They're still alive. They haven't left us, but we're saying goodbye to bits and pieces of them as we're going through this journey, And ambiguous grief, it just has no official verification of the loss, because the missing person, right? The missing person is still present. And so it complicates our grief. It's I don't know how to feel. And people will tell us, well, they're still here. What are you grieving? You still have them here. They don't understand how difficult it is on a caregiver. And then it confuses the relationships. We're in limbo, especially for spouses. We're in limbo. We're unable to fully grieve or resolve the losses that have already occurred. But then we're still anticipate other losses that lie ahead that we know are coming down the pike. And the confusing relationships, am I a spouse? They don't know who I am anymore. So am I a spouse? What exactly is my relationship? So the grief is just ambiguous. There's no ending to it at this stage of the game. And then chronic sorrow, it is so much easier for us to adapt to a change that's final, that we can move on from. But for us taking care of someone, we experience loss after loss after loss. And we watch our loved one experience loss after loss after loss. It's chronic all the way through the journey. And we want to know why we're tired. Yeah. And then anticipatory grief. So those are those feelings that come up that we know we're anticipating that the death is ahead. We know it's coming. And then when dealing with such things like dementia and Alzheimer's and vascular dementia, all of that, we're grieving the loss of someone to the illness, not the death, because it hasn't come yet. So we're dealing with, in the moment, the losses that come along with the journey. And we haven't even begun to process and grieve the death. It hasn't occurred yet. So we're trying to work and anticipate what that's going to be like. So, oh my God, we're in both worlds at the same time. And this is why we're in the past, we're in the future. And even the present moment doesn't give us a whole lot of break, right? So the disenfranchised grief. So there's three components to this. The relationship between the griever and the deceased is not recognized. But she was sick for so long. It's okay. It's over now. You can get on with your life. These are the things that I heard. So it was like, don't feel sad. That relationship, your mom was sick for so long and she didn't know who you were. So, it's over now. Or the death or the loss isn't recognized. Don't feel bad. They're in a better place, they might say. Or, they don't feel bad if you don't go visit them because they don't even know you exist right now. It's like, what? And the griever's ability to grieve is not recognized. People just don't recognize, oh my gosh, all my aunts and my cousins, they all disappeared. My mom's best friends for years and years. They grew up together. My mom was 84 when she died. They all disappeared because they couldn't handle what my mom was going through. And they would just tell me, well, just hang in there. It'll end pretty soon. And you won't have to be driving up there all the time to see her. I mean, these were the comments that I got. They just don't recognize that I'm grieving every single little loss that my mom had. So the difference between ambiguous loss and disenfranchised grief is that ambiguous loss occurs over and over again with no emotional closure. It just continues. There's no emotional closure. There's no ending. And disenfranchised grief happens when a person's loss is not supported by others. They just don't acknowledge it. And I know that my aunts and they wanted to be there, but they just didn't know how. And and it scared them, but I was pretty much left on my own to do this. Heartfelt sadness for the person with dementia. My watching my mom decline was heart-wrenching to me. Watching her disappear inside herself was heart-wrenching for me. This woman was so full of life, and not anymore. And she gave up. She gave up being in this place that she knew where she was at, and she didn't want to be there. She did not want to be there. She wanted to be at the older house, where I tried to have her go. And the doctor was on the board of directors. And so on the day that I was moving furniture in, they came to me and said, no, I couldn't move her in. They couldn't take her. So, watching that loss, knowing that my mom would be really well cared for, and that she would have visitors that knew her, that understood her, all of that was just gut-wrenching. And then we're going to grieve too for personal loss. For 6 years, I did very little other than work 5 days a week with hospice, and then drive up on the weekends. And sometimes I would take a day off in the middle of the week to surprise them, just kind of show up. So make sure everything was kosher and going okay. And so I lost a lot over those 6 years, friendships, life, being able to go to concerts or do whatever it was that I wanted to do. The one thing that I came very close to losing, but I think because of my education, was I came close to losing the rest of my family, my sisters, who none of them helped. And they all had a different relationship with my mom. And like I said, my mom could be very difficult. And they're like, going, I don't have to do this. I don't have to put up with this anymore. And so it fell onto me. And I had to make a conscious choice to understand where they were coming from. I didn't want them to help my mom. I wanted them to help me, give me a day off, or give me a break from having to drive up. But I made the conscious choice knowing that they're doing what they can do, which wasn't much at all. I mean, they went at Christmas time, I think they felt obligated, but I had to make that really conscious decision that I wasn't going to lose the relationship with my sisters, because at some point that's all that's going to be for me and my sisters. But there's a lot of grief around personal losses that people don't understand, they don't see, they don't validate. And then the worry and the felt isolation. I want to take a minute to talk about that. That felt isolation often sometimes comes from, people will ask us how we're doing. And I will say, well, mom's not doing too good. She's da-da-da, I'll go into it and I'll go, no, it's all right. It's all right. She's being taken care of. Just stop going up there every weekend. It'll be fine. And, they tried so hard to intellectualize my grief rather than just supporting me in my grief and validating, wow, this has to be so hard for you. This has to be hard that your sisters aren't helping. This has to be difficult watching your mom decline. I didn't get those very much. And so what happens is that people would ask me, and I would just respond with the simple, I'm fine. Fine, in my book, stands for feelings inside, not expressed. So when we stop expressing how we feel to people, because, we learn people don't like Debbie Downers, right? They don't want somebody that's sad all the time. They want us back being who we were before we had to go into this journey. They want us back in the past but we're not there. We're in this present moment doing our best to survive and to deal with this. And we're just not getting the support that we need. And so they try to intellectualize it, but we're just saying fine. And this is where a lot of the felt isolation comes from. I hear this all the time. People don't get what I'm going through. They don't get it. They don't know. And when we say fine, we cut people off. We're no longer sharing how we feel. And I think that's the biggest reason why we go to the dementia support groups, right? It's because we're with people who can validate what we're going through. And it helps to talk about what's going on and our worries. And we don't feel so isolated when we are walking this journey with somebody else. We also, the throw into the mix of this is entirely different grieving styles. So if you're dealing with a mother or you're dealing with a spouse and you have children, there's completely different grieving styles. On one end of the spectrum, we have intuitive grievers. Those are those feeling grievers that feel with their heart, and they're the ones that will experience the hopelessness or the loneliness, the guilt, the anger, the depression, that inner intense pain or sadness, the tears, the guilt for not doing more or not doing or doing something that maybe we feel we shouldn't have done if we've snapped at them. And that's that intuitive griever, those feelings, and these are what you're most likely to experience. And I think helpful ways for intuitive grievers is active listening. And again, this is where the support groups come in so handy. Providing insights to them, exploring them, encouraging them to express what we're feeling. Those are the things that are really helpful. At the other end of the spectrum, we have instrumental grievers. Those are the ones that are action-oriented and they're in their head. And some of the signs of their grief, how it's expressed, is through anxiety, because it's action. I need to do something. And I'm in my head about it, and I'm trying to intellectualize, process to get an action to do something. And that it creates a lot of anxiety if we can't come up with that. And then perhaps now we're experiencing a little bit of agitation because we're not exactly going into the direction. I'm not taking control. I don't have control over this situation. And it's like, oh, and they're the ones who will memorialize the loss. They're the ones that they're task oriented. They want to do. So when you have an intuitive griever that's all about the heart and the feeling, and what's best for them is active listening, being around somebody who is instrumental and they're thinking and they're just action. They just want to do stuff that's going to make this work out better. It can cause friction between families in this situation. And there are some who are blended. I would consider myself very much a blended. Well, in this case, I had to do both, but overall, pretty much blended. So understanding these different grieving styles, I think, well, I know that they helped me understand my sisters. because I would call them instrumental grievers. I'm going to do something, but there was nothing to be done. Mom was already placed in a facility. There was nothing else that needed to be done now. And, all of mine was the feelings, yeah, I wanted to do more. I felt guilty that she was in the place that she was in. And, oh man, it was totally different. But I understood that about my sisters. So it helped me to accept their style of grieving and not hold it against them and keep our relationships intact, which was very important to me. So warning signs to look at: extreme avoidant behavior. If you're avoiding friends and families for a period of time, prolonged period, over like 3 weeks, you really want to talk to a professional. People need other people to work through this. We need the support and the understanding and people who can hear us, validate us, see us, know what we're going through, hear us, hear our feelings of what we're experiencing, and just validating that, this is normal. And this is what worked for me in this situation. This, again, is the sacredness of the support groups. The lack of self-care, not taking care of your basic needs. If you're not showering, not taking care of yourself, not eating properly, just the overall lack of self-care, this is a warning sign that you need some assistance. You need help from a grief counselor, a therapist, the support groups, your physician, your clergy people that's in your life. You have to reach out and talk with people. Self-destructive thoughts. Okay, so this is not unusual during grief for people to have self-destructive thoughts. Like, oh, I just want to go with them. It's just easier than going through all of this. I just want to die. I hear this all the time. I just give up. I just want to die. But they're not saying they're suicidal. What they're saying is it would just be easier if I didn't have to deal with all of this. So, but if they become very persistent and, these other little thoughts, they come and they go. It's like, I'm done. I just want to get off the planet, and then you're on to something else. But if they're becoming really obtrusive thoughts and you're really looking at them and maybe starting to go, well, man, how would I do it if I didn't want to be here? Those are times to reach out for people. Prolonged depression and anxiety. I would say I was in prolonged depression and anxiety for quite a while, going through the journey with my mom. And I went to my doctor. I had to seek help because I wasn't sleeping at night. And before my mom was placed, she would call me at work about, 50 times. One time we counted, it was 50 times in a day, one right after the other. And I'm just getting ready to go into a support group or to go and do a one-on-one session. And my mom's called me 10 times. And I'm like going, oh my gosh, I was anxiety. I was stressed. When I went into the doctor and I was telling him that I needed something light that would help me to sleep at night, I told her what was going on. And then my phone rang and I was literally out of the chair looking for an it. And, you know, my doctor had to take time to go, Colleen, you're here. You're with me. And one of the simplest things that I had never thought about, she said, let's change your ringtone on your phone. I went, oh. So we changed. She said, every other day, just change the ringtone. So you're not being activated to fight or flight whenever your phone goes off. I was like, oh, well, that was easy. And it was help. Self-medication. A lot of people will find ways to get a break from what's going on, and rightly so. You know why? Because self-medicating with food, alcohol, drugs, some people will go into gambling, drinking wine, binge watching on Netflix. All of this serves a purpose. It's because they work to get us, to give us an emotional break from what's going on. The bad thing about all of these things is that they work. They work, but they do nothing to solve what's going on. And eventually it will start adding to our stress and to our anxiety, for sure. So what we need to do, some self-care tips. So just physical care. My God, eat healthy food. Here's my Red Cross bag. I'm going to this is what I tell people, my Red Cross bag for grief or dealing with a lot of anxiety. 1, you need to eat protein. Your brain needs protein to focus. I understand, which I think many of us do, that with all of this going on, sometimes we just don't feel like sitting down and eating a whole meal. It upsets our stomach. You know, we just don't feel like eating that. So, but protein is really helpful. And you can nibble on protein throughout the day. I mean, there's a reason why they give protein shakes to individuals, because that protein can keep somebody alive for a really long time. And so for us caregivers, you know, our tendency, we're not sleeping really well at night. We have our ear, or especially for caregiving, or we're stressed out. We're just not sleeping well. We get up in the morning, we got to get through the day. So now we're going to go for the caffeine, energy drinks, all of the junk food. That's what we're going to go for. And earlier, when I was talking about the physical responses, and I was talking about the flu-like symptoms, yeah, a lot of that comes from, 1, the food that we eat that deplete us of fluids, causes dehydration. That's where we get the headaches, flu-like symptoms, because we're living off of caffeine and carbs to get through the day. So if we can eat protein, nuts, dairy products, cheese, meat. I often tell people, just even go down to the grocery store and get a little mini party platter that has pre-cut meat and cheese, and nibble on it throughout the day. And if you need your coffee in the morning, just get a chocolate protein drink and add instant coffee, and you have a mocha and you're good to go. You get the best of both worlds. Drinking water is also imperative for our body, for our brain, to be able to function and the process. Our achy joints, headaches, a lot of that is due to dehydration. And then our bodies, you know, build up toxins in it, and water helps us to flush that out. So eating protein, drinking water throughout the day, and the other thing that we need to do is to breathe. When we're under a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety, we hold it into our bodies. There's a lot of times that we want to say something and we don't say it. We just kind of suck it up, and our day is just getting to us. We hold it in our bodies in a way that we become so accustomed to it, we don't even know how much we're holding on to. And I can see people when they come into my office, their shoulders are up by their ears because it's just, we're so tense. And if you take your shoulders and put it up even to your ears, as high up as you can, and take a deep breath, it's kind of hard to do that. So we're breathing really, really shallow. And again, our bodies, our brains need oxygen to fuel the flame that's going to help our brain to fire correctly. And so we need to learn to take deep, deep breaths throughout the day. Oxygen, water, and protein are your best friends. Doesn't hurt to add in the vegetables and fruit either, but I'm telling you, if you're not going to eat, make sure it's protein when you do eat. Exercise, it can help clear your mind, improve your concentration, because you know what? You're getting rid of that tension that's in your body. It gives you a sense of accomplishment that you've done afterwards. You've accomplished something. It also releases chemicals to promote that sense of well-being, those endorphins. It helps our body to fight off disease, and it just strengthens your heart muscle and improves your flexibility, all those things that you're going to need when you're caregiving. Weight, it helps control the weight. But I think the most important thing is that, one, it helps you to sleep better at night because you're burning that energy that's in your body. And if you can take walks outside, even just sit outside for a few minutes, but take a short walk, there's plenty of articles out there that talk about the sounds in nature and how it's wired to our brain to reduce or to release endorphins to our body that's healing. So sleep and rest. First of all, take the TV out of the bedroom. It's not very popular, I know, but our mind gets confused. Am I coming to bed to sleep, or am I laying here to read or to watch TV? So it's always good to do your reading and to watch TV outside of your bedroom. Taking baths, long shower before you go to bed. Mindfulness practice, meditation, listening to guided imagery, listening to soothing, calm music. All of these will help you to sleep and get the much needed rest that you definitely need. Mental care, you know what? It's all right to say, oh my God, I'm losing it. I need help. I can't do this. And pick up the phone and call somebody. Also, journaling is really, really helpful. Today was a great day today was really a hard day because of, and just write it out. What you're doing is getting what's in the inside out. And it helps mentally and emotionally to get this out. Keep a journal on all of your successes. Don't take on more than you can do. Make a list and be okay if you only get one thing checked off the list. That's one thing that you have completed. Celebrate that. Be okay with that. Get into the routine of putting things in the same place, your keys. always in the same place. Paperwork, there's so much paperwork involved anymore with insurance companies and all of that. And after the death, oh my God, more than I can even remember doing at this point. But if you have a place where you keep these things, because remember, we're going back, and the concentration, the ability, the focus to remember, right, is very common with our grief as we're working through all this journey. So if you can come up with a basket where you always have your car keys, you always know where your car keys are at. So now you don't have the stress of running around looking for your car keys or the paperwork that you need. Have a basket, a drawer, whatever. So it's always there. It will save you from running around trying to figure out what's going crazy. We talked about the emotional care, writing a journal, recording your feelings on tape. You can talk on tape. Letters, poetry, sending emails, just sitting and writing emails. But join a support group, talking with others about how you feel to release that, to release those emotions. There's also, I know, part of Hope Dementia at the Hope Bereavement Services, we're providing you, the caregivers, with free massages to help release that stress that's in your body. You're entitled to up to 6 of them throughout the year so that you can just release some of that you're holding on to. You'll feel better. Talking with a friend who understands what you're going through. And I say that understands what you're going through because oftentimes not everybody has earned the right to hear our story. And so the person at the checkout counter, maybe not so much, because you're not going to get the full attention that you're really looking for. So be selective who you share with, and it will benefit you a great deal. Reading books, educating yourself on what works, what doesn't work when supporting your loved one and supporting yourself. And of course, the support groups. And you know what? Laughing is okay. I laughed until I cried when my mom told me that her recorder didn't work anymore, and I found a peanut butter and jelly sandwich shoved into the tape dispenser on her VCR. Now, was it sad? Yeah. I probably felt bad afterwards after I laughed, but I mean, the release that I got from laughing was big. It's okay to laugh. Sometimes it just discharges all of that energy that we pin up. And again, spiritual care. Admit when you need help. Accept it. Accept the help that's being offered to you. You need to do this yourself, but you don't have to do this alone. If you have a church community, talk to your pastor, rabbi, reverend, talk with them, get the help, reach out. Reach out to your friends, support groups, church community, becoming educated on focusing on, I can't do everything for her. But go, I can't do everything, but I can do this, this, and this. Learn how to change the language in your head about what you can't do or what they can't. They can't even walk anymore, but they can listen, or they can see, or they may be able to look at pictures. focusing on what they can do rather than what they can't do anymore will also give you some relief. So I am going to stop sharing. I don't even know how long I talk because I don't know. Any questions now that I can answer? We can send out information on, in fact, I can put in 360-696-5120. So in the chat, that is the number, the Hope Bereavement. And you can call that number to get scheduled for a massage. Because
So
it does.
I do have a question. I do have a question for you. So how is grief the same and different with dementia as opposed to other types of grief?
For the patient or for the caregiver?
For the caregiver.
The difference is, I think, is that with the dementia, that there's no ending to it. It's just that constant chronic grief all along the journey because the losses are piling up. And when you look at a grief with like a death, or even the grief of a loss of your job will cause grief, or loss of your home will cause grief. But you know the cause of it. There's an ending, a recognizable ending to that, where with Alzheimer's, dementia, leading up to the death, it's just one right after the other. It's constant. And at one point, sometimes there's so many changes at one time, you don't even know what you're focusing or grieving on. And then we're not being validated by the community. And everyone understands, oh, death, that's really hard. And we understand, you know, when somebody dies, but they're not so validating with all of the losses that pile up with dementia. And then when you're looking at the death, you're still looking for validation of everything that you've been through. I think we struggle a little bit more with the woulda, coulda. I shouldn't have said that. I wish I hadn't have done that. I could have done this. I should have visited more. I should have done, you know, I think that's even greater because we're exhausted, we're tired, and we have a really long history of losses that centers around this dementia journey. So I think it's slower, the process, and to absorb it, to process it, and to be able to be okay with the loss. I mean, face it, dementia is ugly. What purpose does it serve? And why is there something that, you know, that the whys that's attached to it? It's almost like the group I do for survivor of suicide loss, right? Is the why. We need to know the whys of all of this. And why did this happen? Why don't they have a cure? Where is the, you know, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I say this? Why, you know, it takes a while to process. Did I answer that question?
You did. Most people aren't aware that Hope actually has a bereavement group called New Beginnings. Can you explain the difference between Hope Bereavement and the New Beginnings program and why we felt it was important to have one?
So Hope Bereavement, we have our support groups that we offer for adults is a blended, you know, their death, maybe with dementia, but, sudden heart attacks. I mean, it's a blended, there's all different types of death that go on. But with Hope Dementia, this support group, I think, is important because of the fact that so much of our loss is ambiguous. So much of our loss is disenfranchised, that people don't understand. They just don't understand. I know that when my mom died, I had a colleague stop by and said, "Colleen, how are you doing?" I said, "You know what? This is really hard for me." I said, I'm surprised because I'm this grief expert, right? So I should have a handle. And it's way harder than what I thought it was going to be, even though my mom was sick for 6 years. And they literally said, "Well, it's over now. Don't feel so bad because it's, they're in a better place now. They're not suffering." And I'm like, you don't get it. You don't get it. You're right. They're not suffering anymore. I don't know what better play. I don't know for sure any of this. So the Hope Dementia group is with individuals that have walked this journey, that understand the journey and the multitude of losses, the importance of being seen and the importance of being validated. And I mean, there's a difference between your support group and the support, or the support group after the death, and then your support group. There's a big difference between the two. The one when you're going through it all is for support, is for validation. People share what's worked for them, gives them tools, insights, right? But then after the death, that's when they have to start working on their internal processes and their internal grief. And because it's different, because it's finalized now. And so it is a new beginning because it's finalized. It's not going to continue forever, these changes, and that it's not chronic sorrow. There's that ending. And it's so important to be with people who understand that journey, just like it's important with the survivor suicide loss group. Those people in there have been through this journey. They know what it's like. They know the questions that they ask themselves. They know that they're in search of answers. They know that they're all asking the same question, why? And so that's what the importance is. And then you start looking at, with the dementia group, is like, who am I now? What do I do now? Who am I? I'm not a caregiver anymore, but who am I? I've cut myself off from friends and family because the job of caregiving, the demands were so high that I didn't have time to do all this other stuff. And so now who am I? What am I going to do? And that's where that support comes in as well. Because everyone in there going, yeah, how do we get back into the world of the living? How do we start redefining who we are? And how do we start living life the best to our ability right now? I mean, the grief isn't about getting over the loss. It's learning to live with it and having the best life possible that we can have. And after caregiving for so long, it's really important to be with a group of individuals that are figuring it out as well.
Thank you. Can you speak to the guilt that people experience because they wish it was over, and the guilt that they experience because they're so glad that it is over?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can personally. I mean, I used to say all the time, God, what is she waiting for? Can't you take her? Can't she just die? I am so exhausted. 6 years driving to Aberdeen and back every single weekend after a full week of work. And sometimes I'd go on a Tuesday or a Wednesday just to go back again on the weekend because I figured that, oh, they thought that I was here on Tuesday, so I won't be there that weekend. So I had to be there to make sure that she was being taken care of, right? And it was exhausting, and I was angry having to do it. I did not take good care of myself. I'll be the first one to admit I did not take care of myself. I was angry over the whole situation. And there were times that when I would get home on a Sunday evening, she would call me. And I didn't want to talk to her. But sometimes I'd tell her that you couldn't get a hold of me, lie to her. And I felt a lot of guilt around that. I felt a lot of guilt around snapping at her. And when she died, my first thought was, whoa, this would be the last time I have to come up here. Thank God. And as those words came out of my mouth, I was like, oh my God, what kind of a daughter am I to have those kind of thoughts? That I'm happy that my mom's dead. What kind of daughter am I? And I was like, okay, this isn't good. And I thought, okay, what would you tell a client, Colleen? What would you tell them? Just like, what I would tell them? I would tell them, get a piece of paper out and write down all of the things that you did do versus the things that you didn't do, or the things that you said. What kind of daughter are you? You just spent 6 years going back and forth. That's what kind of daughter you are. You're an amazing daughter. Every single weekend for 6 years, you are an amazing daughter. Yeah, there's a sense of relief. Oh my gosh, but the relief, I think, comes from, it was mixed. It was relief for her because she was unhappy. Even though she was aware of the environment that she was in, she never lost that awareness. And that was the last place she ever wanted to be. And she was miserable. And so there was a lot of relief. The relief was for her. And I hadn't realized it was just as much for her as it was for me. And so I had to stop, because that's the first thing we do as human beings. We go back and say all the things that we should have done, that we could have done. I should have said this. I should have done that. But yada, 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 and put ourselves through hell when we don't stop to think about all the things, oh my God, that we did do. All of the things that we gave up out of love. Sometimes obligation. But I don't care. You can say I did this out of obligation, but there's still behind that is the love. It's the love, is the driving force that allows you to do it out of obligation. Any way you look at it is love. So it's very common for individuals to have that guilt afterwards. But there are ways to look at it and to address it. And what exactly do I feel guilty about? And if it is about, I do this practice with individuals. If it's about the last time that you saw your mom and you didn't give her a hug and you didn't say this or that, then you're going to write a letter to mom or my spouse and go, you know what? I've been thinking a lot about our relationship and before you died and the last time I visited you. And I need you to know something, and write out your feelings. And then when you're done writing it all out, purging it all out, now you're going to stop. You're going to take that letter. You're going to find someone, whether it's your therapist or a really good friend that understands what you've gone through. You're going to ask them, I need you to just be present. I need you to take the role of my mom. And I'm going to read my letter to you, because I need to hear it. Rather than write it out, you need to hear your voice saying it. It needs to be witnessed and it needs to be validated. It doesn't matter. You don't want someone to go, well, no, don't feel like that. You know, you don't even have to say anything. After somebody reads a letter like that, going, wow, you need a hug? But it was heard. You need someone to hear it, because what you're doing is you want that your loved one to hear, but you need to hear it as well. So reading it out loud to an individual that can hold that space and then offer just a simple hug afterwards is a game changer. It's a game changer for individuals.
Thank you. So I have another question that says, how do we help my father who is in denial that mom will get better?
Oh, that's a tough one. I know what I did when I was out in the field. I remember going into a facility and their loved one was coming onto hospice. And the family pulled me aside and go, oh my God, you got to talk to our mom. You know, you got to talk to her. She's like in total denial. She's in there with cookies, serving cookies like this is like a tea party or something. You need to tell her, you have to have a talk with her. And so we went in and they were doing the process, and the wife is just sitting there in the chair and she is offering cookies and coffee to people. And it very much treated as a social thing. And I remember going over and sitting down next to her and asking her, can you tell me what's going on? What's happening to, I don't remember his name, I'll just say Bob. What's happening with Bob? And I waited. Oh my God, it seemed like forever. As she finally looked up and made eye contact with me and said, he's dying, isn't he? And I said, yes. He's not getting better. I said, no, he isn't. So I don't know where in the stage that your loved one with dementia is. And I don't know what he understands about that. But to ask him, what do you understand about this disease process with mom? What do you understand? What do you think is going to happen? What has the doctors said? Give him a chance, because to tell you what he knows and what his perception is of what's happening, because they understand more. It's just really hard to say it out loud. It's just really, it's scary to say it out loud. So just giving him the opportunity And I don't know if mom's in a facility, if she's living with him, he's taking care of her. I don't know all the circumstances. If I knew more of the circumstances, I could help you do that, how to approach that. And that number that I gave, you can call that number and ask to talk with me on a more one-to-one, and I can help you with that.
So she makes the comment that her mom is about at a stage 4 in her dementia, and that she is in care and dad visits every day. So those are the comments.
Okay. So ask him, I mean, has he said she's going to get better? Can she talk? Is she responsive to him? Sometimes it's just his hope. It's not that he doesn't know or recognize what's happening, but for himself is hope. Because what happens, I don't know how long they've been married, but what happens when you go, well, she's never going to get better and she's just going to die, and you no longer hold the hope for them? 59 years. Yeah. He's holding the hope for her. He's very much aware of what's going on. He knows. So maybe talk to him outside. A definitely proud man. Yep. Away. Talk to away from mom. I've worked with others that go daily, spend all their time, and always held that hope, always saw something that would indicate they're getting better. It's their hope. Can you take that away from them? No, I wouldn't. Just be there when the end comes and support him the best way. That ask him, what do you need, Dad? How can I help you? What do you need?
So I think we will close our questioning with this final comment that says, who am I now? I was a caregiver. That's all I was. And who am I now?
Right. Well, I don't think that's all you've ever been, right? But it probably has been for the last so many years. And that's the piece that all of us caregivers, that's that final piece. Who are we? What is my role? I haven't done anything for myself or been excited about going here or going there. And then, oh my gosh, then put COVID on top of it and all that shut down, right? Who are we as individuals? Because we've identified ourselves as a caregiver. So I'm going to encourage you to take that caregiver role and turn it in onto yourself. You are now caregiving yourself. What can you do for yourself? Draw a picture. Take a piece of paper and just draw a head on it and a smile and stick it there and go, what do you need? How can I help you? And I think that's the importance of the dementia support group, is to help identify, what did you do before you were in the caregiver? What things did you like? What can you remember what your passions were at all? Or maybe take an art class or some type of dance class. Furstenberg has all kinds of dance, line dance, whatever, just so that you can get out of that caregiver role and start having just a little bit of fun. Invite somebody over for lunch. You don't need to jump in your car or jump in your kitchen, make a big meal, and take it over to a neighbor and start caregiving. Spend some time caregiving for yourself. And in the support group, I'm sure they're talking about, now what? That's the journey. That's the grief. The finality of the death has happened. Now you have to look at how can you make your life the best it can be moving forward.
Colleen, this was awesome. As always, what can I say? But thank you so much. And thank you for sharing some very tender times, which I know cannot have been easy, and we so appreciate it.
But I
So
got through it.
you did, and we're proud of you for that. So I wanted to share with everyone, this is the New Beginnings support group for people who have lost a loved one to dementia. But I would also say that sometimes when you are going through it, you are having that anticipatory grieving, because you are losing the person that raised you or that has been your spouse for how many years, 59 years, those kind of things. Mary Lookingbill is our facilitator for that group. Mary is a retired chaplain from PeaceHealth who has spent countless hours with people who were about to lose a loved one, and she's incredibly helpful. Next month, we will have an entirely different topic. We will have Melanie Goff from Keller Williams, who will be talking about downsizing. So we'd love to have you attend. We will send out the slides as well as contact information for Hope Bereavement. By the way, the similar names are strictly by accident, but how appropriate.
Right.
So Colleen Storey, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for attending. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.